Hello, time for a Man in Gray book review. Today's book is Wyoming by Barry Gifford, published in 2011 by Seven Stories Press. It's 112 pages. This novella is made up almost entirely of a series of dialogues between a mother and her young son as they drive in a car throughout the South and the Midwest during the 1950s. As we learn, as we go through here and piece together what's happening, we learn that the mother is a divorcee. Her husband our ex-husband is a gangster or a mobster in Chicago. But it turns out he's a nice guy. The two of them get along with each other, and the ex-husband really loves his son, and she occasionally drops him off with his mobster father, and his father lavishes all kinds of presents and stuff on him because he's got all this money from his illegal operations in Chicago. It's primarily a character study. There's not a whole lot that goes on in the novel. There's not a villain that has to be defeated or anything like that. It's basically Roy gradually coming to terms with the fact that he's not in a typical family from the 1950s. He gradually comes to realize that most women are still married. They're not divorced. Divorcees were kind of unusual then. And most women didn't have jobs. The mother is apparently a nightclub performer of some kind, and so that's why she's always on the road, taking her son different places and staying in various motels, most of them fairly cheap and kind of run down. And so he's gradually coming to realize that he's different from other kids. He's also exposed to some of the racism in the 1950s South. His mother is very, very progressive for the time and is upset whenever she sees black people or Latinos being discriminated against. And she spends a considerable amount of her time in Havana, where apparently she works at a club in Havana. This is in the pre-Castro era. And so, the son, it never completely loses his innocence, but he's gradually starting to pick up on the ideas of racial prejudice and divorce and so forth. And then toward the end of the book, we learn that the father is dying from cancer. And so Roy has to come to terms with the idea of death for the first time. No one's ever died that he's known. And so he's having to get used to the idea that his father's not going to be there anymore. So it's a really interesting book. Like I said, it's mostly dialogue. There is one section toward the end that's a short story that Gifford's kind of inserted into there. Which in the novel, it's a short story that the mother writes while she's sitting around in a hotel room bored. So she writes this story and just leaves it behind for the cleaning lady to find. And it's a story about that kind of parallels what's going on with the novel. It's a story about a woman who stops to get gas in a country gas station, and it turns out she has a connection with the gas station attendant. So there's a little story there, but the rest of it is unattributed dialogue. So you have to figure out which one's the mother and which one's the son. But it's not that hard to figure out. I mean, once you get going, it reads pretty easily, even though it's all dialogue and there's no descriptions. You can gradually kind of figure out what's going on. And of course, the one thing that we know that neither the mom nor Roy know is that when Roy becomes a teenager in the 1960s, America is going to change dramatically and permanently, and that Roy's life is going to be completely different than what it is as a kid. So it's a real interesting, really well done slice of life of 1950s America. As you go through here, you kind of get an idea of what life was like. If you're someone who traveled around and stayed in hotels. This is before chain hotels became a big thing. So, you never knew what you were going to get when you went from one place to the other. So it's an interesting novel, but if you're looking for some kind of action-packed story, you're not going to get that here. And so it's not a conventionally written story since it's mostly dialogue, but it's really well done. And Gifford really has a knack for realistic dialogue. It really does sound like there's a young divorcee and her young son talking to each other. It doesn't sound like stagey dialogue. So it's very, very realistic. So if you're into, slice of life kind of character study books, you'll really enjoy this book. The novel is Wyoming. The author is Barry Gifford. This has been another Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching.